This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 290 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with plantsman Rich Kreider of Three Shovels Farm all about Louisiana Iris. The plant profile is on Japanese painted fern, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on Plant in June from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Rich Kreider. He's the owner of Three Shovels Farm. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you for having me, Kathy.
Great to have you on the podcast. We're going to be talking all about those special native iris, Louisiana iris. But before we go into all things about that plant family, let's talk about Rich and maybe dial it back all the way to baby Rich. And were you born with chlorophyll in your veins and a green thumb?
You know, I think I was. I've always been a plant kid. As long back as I can remember, I've always been interested in plants. I've been drawn to unusual things. You know, I wanted the things that nobody else had or nobody else grew. And anything that made me stop and ask, what is that? The next question was, where can I get some? Gardening is kind of always been my stress relief, my me time. And over time, my hobby just really grew out of control. I found that, people were buying plants from me, or people wanted, some of what I had. I was happy to share, but, something bigger seemed like it was the next logical step for me. So Three Shovels Farm came into the picture, and, I find that lets me grow what I want and share with others. But for me, a big part of what I do is education. Growing those unusual plants, a lot of people think they're difficult. Different does not mean difficult, but a lot of people, need some coaxing or some education or convincing to show that they can grow them. So a lot of the things we grow are in that unusual category for a lot of people, whether it's hardy gingers, carnivorous plants, colocasia, some of those things that people may never have seen or may never have seen those varieties of. We spend a lot of time educating and, teaching them, showing them that, while they may look different, they're really not hard to grow, and they can bring them into their garden or their life as well. Three Shovels Farm is primarily mail order, but we do a few shows and other events throughout the year, and we always love garden visitors if they're in the area.
And we should tell our listeners where Three Shovels Farm is located.
Three Shovels Farm is in central South Carolina, just south of Columbia. I know a lot of your listeners are probably thinking, well, why am I here? I split my time between Maryland and South Carolina. I have a lot of experience growing in Maryland and in the Mid-Atlantic area, so I can share what does well here as well as further south.
And let's talk a little bit about your Maryland garden. And so you're zone 7, correct?
6B, 7A, depending on who you ask and what day it is.
Okay. And then when you go down to South Carolina, to Three Shovels Farm, what zone is that? And maybe describe a little bit about the soil and the growing conditions there.
So we are 8A, 8B there. Our soil is very different than what we have here in the Mid-Atlantic or in the DC area. The soil there is very sandy. In that area, you have either sandy or sandy clay. I know here we have a lot of heavy clay. We have rocky soil here. We don't have that in the area I'm in the South. It's extremely sandy. And for most good gardening, it has to be heavily amended. So that introduces a lot of other challenges because the sandy soil does not hold nutrients well. It does not hold moisture well. And you really have to do a lot of extra preliminary work to have a good place to grow.
And here we are with clay, jealous of sandy soil.
Yes, I can tell you, growing up with the sand, I always wanted something else. And then when I moved to Virginia 35 years ago, I went out the first time with my shovel and I wished I had sand. So you're never happy with what you have.
Exactly. The grass is always greener, as they
Yes.
say. So we should let listeners know. I know you through the Daylilies Society, and I edit Fanfare, the publication for the regional Daylilies societies, and you're heavily involved with Daylilies too, of course.
I am. I am the current president for the American Daylilies Society, or the American Himericalis Society, and I am a board member representing the Mid-Atlantic area, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and West Virginia.
So Three Shovels Farm also has tons of daylilies that you could purchase too. And I should also say that I help out with the social media for Three Shovels Farm as well.
Yes, thank you.
And so let's turn our attention to those wonderful flowers, Louisiana Iris. And I guess our first question is, why? What about them do you love? Why should someone grow Louisiana Iris?
Well, I grew them in Maryland for years, and they're just an outstanding plant. It's one of those things, again, that a lot of people don't grow and a lot of people haven't seen, but it's an outstanding plant, and it really fits kind of into a niche, I think, in a lot of gardens, because it provides some height, it provides some color, and it provides some bloom at a time when there's not a lot to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, one of the features I like about it is they have a somewhat unusual growth cycle. Louisiana Iris begin their growth cycle in the fall, and most of them have some green foliage throughout the winter, where a lot of plants are not. Even here in the Maryland area, we have green on those plants throughout the winter when most things are not. So it provides some interest there. But the other reason that I like them is they're just really hardy plants. A lot of people will associate them with water because that's somewhat part of their native habitat, but they don't require water to grow. They're not water iris. I hear that all the time. They're plants that can handle a lot of water, but they don't require it. They're perfectly happy in a regular garden bed. And if your other plants are doing fine, the Louisiana Iris are going to do fine as well.
Good to know. And I was going to say, the foliage you describe as staying green throughout the winter, that's like most iris foliage, right? Kind
Yes.
of tall, sword-like vertical element in the garden.
Yes. Now, the height doesn't come with the Louisianas until the early spring, but you'd probably have, somewhere between 10 and 14 inches in the winter, because you've got a good bit of height there already.
Mm-hmm. And so the name Louisiana Iris makes you assume it's native to Louisiana, but it's also native to other parts of the U.S., right?
That's right. So the native range for the Louisiana Iris is really the U.S. Gulf Coast, starting in Texas and kind of working its way all the way around, all the way over to North and South Carolina. There are 5 species of Louisiana Iris, and the reason they're called Louisiana Iris is because 4 of those species overlap in Louisiana. There's no real magic to that. That's just where they happen to overlap. But 4 of the 5 species overlap there. That's where the name came from. The other species, interestingly enough, is one that is from Georgia and South Carolina, although hard to find them in the wild there. They are still cultivated, but hard to find them in the wild in those 2 states.
And where did they naturally grow in the wild? Would it be a swampy area, or where were they found?
Typically be a wetter, swampier area, but not necessarily flooded all the time. But it would be a wetter, swampier area. Speaking of their native range, what I just described sounds like they're very southern plants, and a lot of your listeners are probably thinking that would never work for me. But some of the native ranges of those extend well up the Mississippi Valley, all the way up into Ohio. So there are some that are extremely hardy. I know people that grow them in Wisconsin and Minnesota. There's a huge public garden in Syracuse, New York that contains all 5 of the species and many hybrids. So they are extremely winter hardy and can handle colder conditions than you might imagine, just seeing where they natively grow.
Good to know. They are super tough plants. And so you described some of the species. Maybe let's break that down a little bit more. Are there ones that are more available for the gardening public to grow and some that are more rare?
So of the species, you can find all of them. I won't bore your listeners with the specifics of all the 5, but the 5 species are Brevicalis, Fulva, Gigantus Aurelia, Nelsonii, and Hexagona. Hexagona is the one from Georgia and South Carolina, and it's probably the hardest one to find, but the other 4 are very common. The Nelsonii is one of the more interesting ones to me because it is a beautiful, beautiful red iris, but it has a very small native range. In fact, it only comes from one area around Abbeville, Louisiana. So it gets the name the Abbeville Red. But in the native area in the wild, they are beautiful in the spring with those red flowers just everywhere.
Wow. And so those are the straight native species, of course.
Yes.
But there's, I assume, hundreds, maybe thousands of selected cultivars.
They're close to 3,000. I don't have an exact number on that, but last I looked, there were somewhere north of 2,800 registered cultivars. Now, a lot of those are older varieties. Some of those may have actually been wild collected varieties, from 50 or 60 years ago that were named. There are some natural hybrids that occurred in the wild, but there are about 3,000 varieties, many of them still in cultivation and still in commerce, and many of them still readily available today.
Good. And I imagine some of those are selected cultivars from the wild, and maybe some are done by breeders, so both kinds.
Yes, the vast majority of those 3,000 would be done by breeders, to focus on specific characteristics, just like any other plant. We want, the sturdier plants, we want the brighter colors, we want the bigger flowers, we want the longer bloom season. So hybridizers focus on various elements there and try to, bring out the best from their children.
Mm-hmm. Is there any work being done, say, on reblooming Louisiana iris, as there are with other irises that are rebloomers?
Louisianas don't rebloom at this point. I know a lot of people that would love to see them rebloom, but at this point, we don't have any that rebloom.
Interesting. Great. So tough plant, hardy plant, we know where they're native to, what they like. So where and how do we plant them? I think when you usually get them, it could be a division from somebody else's plant. So it might be bare root, or when it arrives from a mail order like Three Shovels Farm, you're usually getting it, say, wrapped in damp newspaper and bare root.
That is correct. So more often than not, if you buy a Louisiana Iris, you're going to get a rhizome. You're going to get a big, thick root that's going to be planted. Most of your listeners are probably familiar with bearded iris. Mm-hmm. I spend a lot of time explaining the differences, but most people are familiar with bearded iris, and they're planted, relatively shallow and almost on top of the ground. A Louisiana iris is planted, 2 to 3 inches below the ground. That rhizome is going to grow under the soil and planted very much the same way as a bearded iris, just a little deeper and with obviously room to grow. They are pretty hardy plants in terms of how quickly they can grow and spread around. So give them room, but just a well amended location and a couple inches deep. They're simple to plant, simple to grow. Now, we'll point out a lot of people are now selling. A lot of nurseries are now selling potted plants. The rhizomes, the bare root rhizomes, are typically shipped in the fall, sometime between August and October, depending on where you live. But the potted plants can be planted anytime that you can work the soil. So, for example, we sell potted plants. We ship them probably 9 months out of the year. So, anytime the soil can be worked, you can plant the potted plant because you're not really disturbing the roots, and the plant really doesn't know it's been moved.
That does, make a good point about the plant being disturbed, because when you receive it bare root, or just the rhizome, and it has to take a little bit more time to get established, say, than a potted one, correct? Get its bearings.
It does, but remember the growth cycle for the Louisiana Iris starts in the fall. So we try to get them out before that growth cycle starts, and when you get them bare root, they're ready to go.
So you said good, well-draining soils, a couple inches deep, versus the bearded iris, where we kind of want that at level with the soil usually, and more than a few inches apart, because it's going to start multiplying.
Yes. And I'll point out, you said good, well-draining soil. I think that's a standard for most things. The Louisiana Iris can handle a wetter condition. I know people that, say, I have a place in my garden that stays wet longer than I'd like it after it rains, or I have a place near my air conditioning unit that holds a little bit of water. If you have a wetter place, they are perfectly happy there, and they will not complain about the extra water, whereas a bearded iris would say, not going to happen. The Louisianas would love that location. If you had any location near water, they would be completely happy, but it's not a requirement. They can do fine with regular garden conditions.
Yeah, I'm thinking especially of rain gardens, stormwater swales.
Yes.
We'll call it the ditch along the side of the road. They almost want to plant themselves in there. And then, of course, maybe at the end of a downspout, or someplace, as you say, in your landscape that just sits wet. Maybe your neighbor's property is draining onto an area. I hear a lot of people complain about, a creek forms whenever it storms from their uphill neighbor. So those would be perfect places for Louisiana Iris.
Yeah, I call those opportunities, not problems.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you can have your whole collection there. But of course, we didn't talk yet, Rich, about sunlight. So I think the full sun for best flowering.
Yes, full sun. We in South Carolina, which is hot and bright, we grow them in full sun. They can handle full sun. I tell people, try to make sure they get 5 or 6 hours of sun a day, but we grow ours in full sun with no shade and no real protection from the sun. There are some of the pure species that would prefer a little bit of filtered shade, but generally speaking, they can all handle full sun with no issues.
Mm-hmm. And if you had part shade, do you think they could still survive, but just not flower as much?
Absolutely. If you go into the swamps where they grow in the brighter places, but they're not full sun there. They are in sun, and they get lots of light, but they are not in broad open areas, and they may get some shade at some parts of the day, but yeah, they'll do completely fine there.
Yeah, I'm picturing that classic Louisiana swamp, maybe a little shed to the side on stilts over water.
Yes.
Yeah, that definitely is dappled sunlight and not straight sunlight.
Yes.
But good to hear that they'll still flower in those conditions. And do they have, Rich, a native pollinator, or what are the most common pollinators for Louisiana Iris?
I would say they're bees, but I'm not a hybridizer myself, so I don't know, but I believe they would be bees. I'm sure there are other things that do that, but most likely I think bees.
So continuing care and feeding of your Louisiana Iris, do they need fertilizing?
They do. So natively they would have grown, near water, near a river that, before we came along, they flooded every year, and they got the benefit of the silt from upstream that flooded out into the lower areas and kind of replenished the soil and replenished it naturally. They do enjoy fertilizer, something balanced. They don't need anything special. They tend to like something a little more acidic, so I tell people to use azalea or camellia fertilizer because it's got a little extra acidity in it. But just something, basic, 888, 10 anything like that gives them what they need. They're not super picky about that. If you have some compost or some manure or any of those other things, you could certainly work that in, and they love that as well.
And do they need any mulching? Or I'm thinking maybe going into the winter, especially in the more northern range of where they're going, do they need some insulation?
They probably would not oppose it. Unlike bearded iris that would likely rot or give you problems under mulch, you can easily mulch the Louisiana iris, and you can mulch them with everything else in your garden and not have to worry about them. So I typically mulch them in my beds, and they're happy. They also like the benefit of the added moisture from the mulch.
Yeah, and that's important to never let them dry out, I think.
They can dry out. They probably won't like you very much if they get completely dry, but they can handle it once they're somewhat established. They may pout, but they'll be okay.
And what are you mulching with, Rich?
Depending. Here, I would use hardwood mulch, or I would use some variant of that. In the South, we use pine straw mulch because it's there and it's cheaper.
Yep. And so if you're a small space gardener and you're growing Louisiana Iris in containers all year round, do they need any special extra care?
The only special extra care I will caution people with containers, these tend to be, most of them tend to be fairly aggressive plants. Now, I don't want to scare people and make them think they're going to take over their garden, but invariably I get at least one call a year from someone who planted a Louisiana iris in a very nice pottery pot, and they say, "Your plant broke my pot." Well, don't put them in that. But they can grow large, and they can grow, I think, quicker than most people think they can grow. It just means you've got something to share with your neighbor, or you've got something to fill a bigger spot. But in pots, they do completely fine. At the farm, we grow a combination of in the ground and in raised containers. We're somewhat space limited at the farm, so the containers are not so much for any purpose other than keeping them separated. We don't want to send somebody the wrong plant, so we were able to keep them contained a little better, and they don't grow into each other if they're in those containers.
And it can be a bear if they get really overgrown, right,
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
To separate them. So that brings up dividing. How often? And
so they are divided just like any other iris or just like any other perennial. We have a bag of tools that we use that may look like we're doing something unsavory, but it would consist of something like a hatchet, an axe, something to prise them apart. Most of them, if you've divided them, every few years, you don't have a big problem. They're pretty easy to pull apart. They grow just like any other iris or just like bearded iris, not any other iris, but bearded iris with, the mother rhizome and then the daughters off to the side. So they're pretty easy to pull apart if you stay on top of it. If you've had them in a container and you haven't taken care of them and divided frequently, they can wrap around each other a bit, and they can, but you just have to pull them apart or cut them apart, and you can tell which pieces are still good and viable, and you'll most likely wind up with more than you thought you had.
so you're looking for pieces that are like firm and solid, no like squishy or rotted parts.
Right.
Yep. And then something maybe with a little bit of a root growing off of it.
Roots would be nice, but really not required. They're going to regrow those roots anyway when you divide them. But I would say look for green, look for the growth point on the end, and you've got a viable plant. Obviously, for most of them, bigger is better. Some people are surprised by how big or how long some of the rhizomes can get. Some of the varieties, like black gamecock, for example, a really big rhizome on black gamecock might be the size of a person's thumb.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a big rhizome on another one might be almost as big as somebody's wrist. So they're it's like a lot of plants. There's a lot of difference in the size there, but some of them can be fairly large. So I hesitate to say, look for something big, but look for something that's larger and firm, larger by comparison to everything else in that pot. You'll be happier with that.
Nice. And so for timing, since you said that has unusual growth cycle that begins in the fall, I think we're going to be dividing in late summer.
Yes, I would say here probably August into September. Give them a chance to settle in before it starts to get cold. Like bearded iris, I would say give them 4 to 6 weeks to settle in before the first frost and the really hard freeze. But yeah, August, September, when it's cool enough to get out and work. There's no reason to do it super early. Just give several weeks to settle in. You'll be fine.
And you can share. It's a great pass along plant. And make sure that a label goes with it, or something is rubber banded to it. Rich, I write with a Sharpie right on the rhizome.
That's perfect. Right on the rhizome or right on the leaves. There's plenty of leaf there to write on as well.
That's true. Is the leaf section.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
You have one new message. Translating. Disney and Pixar's Hoppers is now available on Disney+.
You could say that again.
Critics are calling it Pixar's funniest movie ever and a wildly entertaining ride. Blizzard Potato. It's certified fresh and verified hot.
Now we party.
This is incredible!
Wow, I am clearing the rest of the day.
Disney and Pixar's Hoppers, now available on Disney+. Rated PG.
So when you divide, do you cut back the leaves? I see a lot of people do that by down to maybe a third.
I do, and I probably go more than a third. A lot of the leaves on the Louisiana Iris can be 2 feet or more. So we usually cut them back to 6 to 8 inches on the Louisianas when we're dividing, especially if we're going to ship. We grow a lot of potted plants, as I said earlier, so we cut them back there as well, so the longer leaves don't cause the rhizome to tip out of the pot before it gets rooted in. So we cut them back.
That's what I've been doing wrong, because I'm just very conservative about cutting the foliage, because I always think it needs the foliage, to get energy. But it sounds like we can be much more aggressive in cutting it back.
Yes, you can. And actually, if you're dividing, I personally find it easier to cut it back before you start dividing. Then you don't have to wrestle with that extra foliage in your way.
Yep, that makes it a lot easier. And does the plant need an annual cutback or clean out of any kind?
Yeah, we typically cut ours back. The old foliage after they bloom, probably July, early August, it's going to start to look, a little tired. It'll yellow oftentimes, most times. It you can tell it's about ready to go through that cycle where out with the old and with the new. So we go through and we cut it down and just give them room to regrow their new foliage. The old stuff is not going to look good next year. So might as well get it out of the way. Along the other lines of cleaning up, a lot of the flowers that bloom will self-pollinate or pollinate with the help of bees, and they'll make very large seed pods. If you don't want to experiment with what you might get if you planted those seed pods, I would recommend cutting them off as soon as they finish blooming. It doesn't take energy from the plant, and you don't wind up with seeds that drop into your garden and might resprout and grow something that you didn't plan to have there. It might not be the most beautiful new cultivar ever, or it might be. You never know what you're going to get. But if you don't want that, then I would suggest cutting those off. It won't take energy from the plant, and they'll focus it back on next year's growth.
Yeah, and I find those seed pods, they're really heavy and
Yes,
floppy.
They do.
So it's just a neater look to keep them cut off.
Yes.
And so for common problems that we need to look out for Louisiana iris, I know iris borer, all iris are going to be affected by that.
Yeah, so iris borer are a bit of a problem for them. I won't say they're more or less affected by it than other types of iris, but if you live in an area where iris borer are a thing, that is one of the issues. Aphids can be a problem in the early spring, although we have very little issue with that here or in South Carolina. And occasionally we'll have rust. The rust, looks unsightly, but it doesn't hurt the plant. It doesn't do any real damage to it. It doesn't prevent it from blooming. It just looks bad. It causes the leaves to yellow, and they have that rusty appearance to them when the rust is there, which can be treated, but those are about the biggest problems. Fortunately, because the plant can grow in wetter conditions, soft rot is not typically a problem for iris. For the Louisiana iris, if the rhizome is damaged in some way or somehow compromised, it could be affected by rot, but typically not an issue because, as I said earlier, you really can't give them too much water.
And what about pests like deer? Do they like to graze on it? I would imagine moles and voles are a big issue too.
Moles and voles can be an issue. Deer tend to not be a problem. I joke and tell people if you can plant your iris and keep the deer away from them long enough to get rooted in, the deer can't pull them up. And they seem to not like the taste of iris. They just I've never had a problem with deer except when I had just planted iris, and they kind of nibble on them and pull them out of the ground, but they don't really eat them. So they can be replanted if you catch them early enough.
Good. And if they do rip them out, pretty easy to stick them back in.
Absolutely.
And then any advice for the moles and voles that might affect them?
Get a cat, an energetic cat.
Yes. One that likes to hunt. Not just any cat, but one that likes to hunt for sure.
Yes.
And so let's talk a bit about some of your favorite varieties. So we mentioned black gamecock earlier. That's one I have, and I just love it. That's a super, super dark purple. Just a stunning, really dramatic flower.
So that's probably the top of my list. I think that's a good starter plant for most people because it stays relatively small. It's pretty prolific in terms of how it grows and how quickly, but it also blooms a lot. I think you get a lot of bang for your buck with that one. Another one that I like is Eileen Hollander. It's a red violet color. It has larger flowers on it. I think it's more of a deep pink than red, but if the hybridizer thought that was red, so we'll go with that. but it's just a beautiful full flower, and it really catches your attention. Another that I'm particularly fond of is Edna Clanch. It's a lemony yellow flower that's ruffled around the edges. I know a lot of people may not be particularly wild about yellow flowers, but this is a really beautiful yellow, and it has that extra ruffle around it. Black Widow is another one, similar in color to Black Gamecock, but very tall, very stately. It's a dark purple. It really is black for all practical purposes. It's just got that simple iris form to it that just makes a statement. Very tall, very, very slender plant, but beautiful statement piece. And another one that I really like, it's a newer introduction, is Raspberry Rouge. It's kind of I don't know how to describe this. It's a mix of pink, red, yellow. It's got some veins in it. It's a little bit of a lot going on in that flower, but it's really, really pretty. And it really is one of those that just gets your attention when you see it bloom.
And I think those are great ones also as cut flowers. I love using Louisiana Iris because they don't mind sitting in wet, so they're a good long-lasting cut flower. And they have like a light, I'm going to call it an earthy fragrance, but I don't think you're growing Louisiana Iris specifically for the scent.
No, I would say most of them don't have a fragrance that most people would, be drawn to. It's not a bad fragrance. It's just not something that is sweet like a rose.
And what are some good companion plants for Louisiana Iris? Because when they're not in bloom, you have the tall, straight foliage, some shorter than others, but then it's just basically green, right?
Well, if you want to extend your iris collection, some other iris that like similar conditions are Japanese iris and Sudata iris. Same general growing conditions, just different bloom season there. So you get a different time of year for iris. Other plants that are really great companions because they like similar conditions are Colocasia or Alocasia. Daylilies are great. Most perennials are great. One thing that I tell people when they're planting their garden, don't overlook herbs, because herbs bring such color and pattern and texture that you just don't get that from a lot of things. The ferny appearance of fennel, for example. Again, another tall plant, but a great contrast to a lot of the bigger leaves and the fuller plants. That's a little airy thing that can kind of make a difference in a garden. I was in a garden one time. The owner had planted big cabbages, like just regular cabbages, in his garden, and it was the most unusual thing to see. But they really worked in that area, and they broke up, a bigger space that really provided a big contrast to the other things going on around it.
Interesting. So you talked earlier about the breeders were looking for, reliable plants, ones with bigger flowers. What are some other things that iris breeders are looking out for, and maybe some of those new cultivars that are coming onto the market?
So I think one of the things that most of the new breeders are looking for are sturdier plants, sturdier scapes and stalks on those plants so that they hold the flowers up better. A lot of the iris do have, tall flower stalks. So they're looking for something that's more sturdy, but they're also looking for, varieties that have more flowers on them, more buds on them, so they have more flowers and to extend that bloom season. A pretty flower is one thing, but a pretty plant that blooms for far more days is much nicer than one that only has 2 or 3 flowers on the stalk. So I think they're looking for that. And of course, they're looking for plants that are, maybe smaller or, that can be grown in a more constrained area. I know one hybridizer that likes big, bold. So he looks for the bigger the plant, the better for him. So there are a lot of things out there, but I think that the biggest thing is just a hardy plant, a good plant, that's gonna grow and perform in a wide range of areas. One that doesn't require excessive water would be nice, but one that has a longer bloom season and sturdy enough stalk to hold those flowers up is top of the line in my book.
Mm-hmm. All things we want for all plants.
Yes.
Yes. So great for that. And so those are some of the new things that breeders are looking for. But what about some of those old-fashioned favorites in the Louisiana Iris families? Are they all still available? If I, was reading Elizabeth Lawrence books and some others, would I still be able to get a hold of some of those?
Yeah, you'd be able to get a hold of some of them, and that's one of the things that really is close to my heart. There are a lot of older varieties out there that people just don't grow anymore, or they just don't know what they have anymore. You mentioned earlier, if you're going to give a plant to somebody, put a tag with it so they know what they have. A lot of people don't care what they grow. They just want the pink one, or they just want the white one. So there's a place for that, but it's hard to keep up with the older varieties when people just lose track of what they have. So some of us are trying to maintain some of those older varieties that are historic in nature and go back many, many years. Some of the things that our newer varieties are based on today are those older plants, but many of those are really hard to find in commerce. There aren't a lot of nurseries that specialize in Louisiana Iris. So finding the old ones and finding the ones that have been around for 40, 50, 60 or more years are difficult and becoming harder. So we are making an effort to try to grow and preserve those and to make sure that they are around and that those genetics are still there and that history is still there for people to see.
And so are there any favorite public garden displays that people can visit and so they can see a bunch of these different cultivars and maybe figure out which ones they want in their garden?
So the one that I would recommend is not close, unfortunately. I see Louisiana Iris in random gardens around. I visit a lot of gardens and I see a few here and there, but I don't know of any close gardens that have big Louisiana Iris displays. I'm working to change that, but so far I don't have one to report. But the one that I would recommend, if you're ever in the Savannah, Georgia area, the Coastal Georgia Botanic Garden has a huge Louisiana Iris collection. It is absolutely stunning in the spring, and they have hundreds of varieties in that garden, many other things in that garden as well, but the iris collection there is one of the best I've seen anywhere.
Any other public gardens you recommend to see iris in?
Longwood, of course, has iris, and they have lots of different types of iris. That one's closer to home, but I don't believe they have a large Louisiana collection. And the garden I mentioned earlier in Syracuse, the name escapes me, but I will get it to you so we can share it with your listeners after the fact, is perhaps a little closer than Savannah. But those are the ones that come to mind as having big collections. Unfortunately, this is a plant that a lot of people don't know, and I think that's a shame because it's a great plant, and I think it's underutilized, and I think it certainly has a place in the garden if people would give it a chance, but people just don't know about this particular variety of iris like I wish they would.
So if listeners want to contact you to find out more, how can they do so, Rich?
So you can track me down through our website, 3shovelsfarm.com. That's the word 3, not the number, 3shovelsfarm.com. We also have a Facebook presence, and we respond to messages all the time there. That's probably the best two ways. The website has all my contact information, and Facebook is a great way to get in touch with us and follow what we do.
Terrific. So if you were a beginning gardener starting today, Rich, just a blank slate. What are the Louisiana Iris you would recommend starting with?
I would probably recommend something that I did not mention in my favorite list, but it's one of the tried and true ones. It's called Dixie Deb. It's one of the earliest ones to bloom. It's one that you really you can't mess it up. You can't mess any of them up, really. They're that easy. But Dixie Deb is a tall, bright yellow, classic iris form. I'd also recommend Black Gamecock. I'd recommend probably Eileen Hollander. I recommend that one a lot. And Edna Clounch, as I said, is another great start. Black Widow is going to be harder to find, and Raspberry Rouge is newer, so it's going to be more expensive. But there are a lot of other great ones too, like red beans. You have Louisiana, so you've got all the southern food names here. You've got red beans, you've got andouille, you've got many of those others that really bring out the Louisiana flair if you want to do that. But those are great plants, and they perform well, and they're tried and true. Everybody has them, but everybody's got them because they're just so good at what they do.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to have to look out for Black Widow. I think that's a perfect addition to any goth garden, especially.
Totally,
great
totally.
One. Yeah, and also Red Velvet Elvis. That's one I've been looking out for.
It's a beautiful one.
Beautiful big one. And so if you're really caught the Louisiana Iris bug and you want to go crazy collecting them, is there a group or club for them?
Sure. There is the Society for Louisiana Iris. You can find them online at Louisianas, plural.org. And, they are the American Iris Society affiliate for Louisiana Iris. And they can give you more information than you thought you ever wanted to know about Louisiana Iris and how to grow them. It's a great group, and I highly recommend.
Thank you so much, Rich.
Thank you.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the genius ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
This episode is brought to you by Prime. What if you had one more chance with the one that got away?
Sam, you came home.
Based on the best-selling novel from Carly Fortune. Every Year After follows childhood friends Sam and Percy as they reunite in the dreamy, nostalgic lakeside town of Barry's Bay.
Love can be hard to find. So if you're lucky enough to find that person, never let go.
A second chance at first love. Every Year After, now streaming only on Prime.
Japanese painted ferns plant profile. Japanese painted ferns, Anthurium nipponicum, are perennial plants that highlight shady spots in the garden. They are native to Eastern Asia. They're hardy to zones 3 to 8. The mature size is about 18 inches tall and wide. The silvery highlights are the hallmark characteristic of this beautiful fern, but many cultivars also have red midribs, such as the award-winning cultivar Pictum. The cultivar Silver Falls received the Royal Horticultural Society's Award of Garden Merit. Other popular cultivars include Ghost and Burgundy Lace. Japanese painted ferns make great garden accents and look good featured in containers. Ferns do not have flowers, so they do not attract pollinators, but they do assist wildlife by providing shelter and hiding spots. They are deer-proof and have few pests. They thrive in consistently moist, well-draining acidic soils with lightly dappled to full shade. Painted ferns also appreciate a top dressing of composted leaves. These ferns are low care. By late winter, you'll want to cut them back, though, as they look a bit ratty and tattered at that point. Divide Japanese painted ferns in early spring, just as the new fiddleheads emerge, or you can do so in the early fall. Do so every few years to maintain the plant's vigor. Japanese painted ferns, you can grow that. What's new this week in the garden? Well, I'm enjoying my early season daylilies and the fuchsias in my annual containers. Over at the community garden plot, the dahlias are starting to bloom and the okra and squash seedlings are up. In garden tips that we shared this week, we talked all about plant combinations, including that a classic low-effort container combination is an evergreen or boxwood in the center, surrounded by colorful violas or pansies in the cool seasons and wave petunias in the warm seasons. In local gardening events, if you're in the DC area, you might want to attend Growing Roses at Home, hosted by Merrifield Garden Center at their Fair Oaks, Virginia location. This is on Sunday, June 28th at 1 p.m. It's free and open to all. More details are at merrifieldgardencenter.com/classes. In this class, you'll learn about the environmental requirements, seasonal tasks, and other tips for growing abundant roses at home. Instructor John Gazarek, Merrifield plant specialist and American Rose Society consulting rosarian, will share his experiences growing roses as well as some of his preferred products and solutions to common issues experienced by rose gardeners. At the Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, they've announced their summer hours. Wednesday, June 3rd through Sunday, September 6th. They are open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Wednesday through Sunday, and then Mondays and Tuesdays they are open from 8 a.m. And then mark your calendars for the Lotus and Water Lily Festival happening the weekend of Saturday, July 18th and 19th. Find out more about that at the Friends of Kenilworth Gardens website. And then on Saturday, August 1st, Green Spring Gardens in Alexandria, Virginia, is holding a class on backyard composting, principles, and best practice. That's at 10:30 a.m. till noon in person at Green Spring Gardens. You can register at fairfaxcounty.gov/parks. The fee is $19 per person. Learn how to turn food scraps and yard waste into nutrient-rich compost from your garden. Classes will be indoors and then move outside to Green Springs Compost Station to illustrate examples of composting practices with the help from their Extension Master Gardeners.
This is Christy Page with Food Gardening Network with 10 fruits and vegetables to plant in June by Amanda MacArthur. Some plants like the cool weather while others prefer the heat. Some plants are easy to start indoors like tomatoes and others prefer to be planted directly like beans. One of my rules of thumb is to visit my local garden center and follow their guidance. They don't typically put anything out until it's safe for them to be planted. That's why you might see herbs in May, but not tomatoes until late May or June. The vegetables that are best to plant in June for this purpose revert to zones 3 to 7-ish. If you live in a warmer planting zone, you'll need to bump up your times to a period after the last frost, when the ground is just beginning to warm consistently and the weather stays above 60 degrees. First, tomatoes. Tomatoes thrive in the sun and heat. Some people plant in late May, but most gardeners agree that early June is the best time to start planting tomatoes after any chance of frost has passed and the temperature is steadily 70 degrees or more. Second is melons. Melons prefer the warmth, but they also like a long, warm season. So zone 3 might not be best for melons, but they can grow in zone 5 starting in June if you buy types that require a shorter growing window. 3, cucumbers. Again, depending on your zone, cucumbers are often a June plant. They grow more quickly than any other vegetable, so you only need to start them indoors about 3 weeks before putting them in the ground. 4, corn. Corn wants the air to be at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit and 3 weeks beyond the last frost, which makes it a perfect June vegetable to plant. 5, peppers. As you can tell, every plant in this list is warm-blooded, and peppers are no exception. Start peppers indoors, then transplant outside in early June. Different varieties of peppers will take longer to grow. For example, orange bell peppers aren't recommended with zones with short growing seasons, and red bell peppers are on the cusp. 6 is squash. Really, both summer and winter squash can be planted in June. You can plant butternut squash pretty late in the season, but you can't plant it while it's still cold out. Like the others in this list, they want to be planted in warmer weather at least 2 weeks after the last frost. 7, cauliflower. Sown indoors weeks ahead of time, early June is a fine time to plant cauliflower outdoors, or even in late May. 8, root vegetables. May was a good time to plant these, and early June is still a good time to sow carrots, radishes, beets, and potatoes. All of them prefer a bit less sun than, say, tomatoes, so you can plant them near bigger plants that will grant them some shade. 9, peas. While we think of peas as a spring vegetable to plant, peas are quite hardy, so you can plant them anytime from March to June and even a bit beyond. 10, kale. Hardy lettuces like kale and chard can be planted in June without too much fuss, and you can sow seeds directly into your soil at this point. You don't need to start them indoors. Typically, lettuces, which don't survive summer heats, would have been planted in the spring and then also in the fall, but kale and chard do quite well in June. Well, these are my top 10 fruits and vegetables to grow in June. What are yours? This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at foodgardening.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to GardenDC Podcast Episode 64, Daylilies, the Perfect Perennial, Episode 53, Superior Perennials, Episode 150, Sourcing Native Plants. You can become a listener supporter by going to the link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too. Happy gardening!